Yep, we're kind of on a hillside. The camera doesn't really pick it up, but maybe that angle of the tree. See, this is actual vertical right here. And you can look at the legs on the camera stand if I choose to use that, but it's pretty steep. And there's a typical farm type problem right in the middle of one of our roads. And this one here falls into the category of, yeah, maybe it's a tractor problem, not a saw problem. Although I'm sure that some of the better sawyers out there could turn that into a saw problem pretty quickly. And so we're going to pull it over with the winch and then just block it up so I can get it out of the trail. That's going to be the major task for the day. Now, what I wanted to talk about, and actually I've wanted to talk about for the last couple of videos, I just kept getting sidetracked, was saw configuration, because that's really what the channel's about, chainsaws. You know, and I gotta tune this one up a little bit, put a file across that chain. That's a 572 junk pile build. It's really not a junk pile saw at all. It's a very nice saw, but sounds good, right? And there's my older 562. I believe it's a 2014 model. I've lost track. I've had a couple of those where I've built them and, you know, sent them out and got them back and sent them back out again for testing the builds, right? And I've had this one, I don't know, for the last year and a half, 2 years now, just running the heck out of it. Kind of been my backup saw. Sometimes it's the primary saw. And you know, really, if I could use that saw, probably save me a lot of pain and agony. You know, this one here is a great saw to run, but it's, you know, I'm getting older. A little higher compression. You know, it'll snap right too, that saw. A little heavier, but you know, I kind of built it, kind of missed the mark on the muffler, but it runs really strong, so I don't feel like changing it. So the narrative on that saw was I wanted to go to a full wrap, have a sort of a Western style looking saw. It wasn't something I particularly needed, it was something I wanted to do because it was fun. I had that saw in that full wrap configuration for a little while, and that's the genesis of this video. What I'm going to do is fold in a bunch of video where I'm bore cutting with these two saws, and you can see one will struggle a little bit even with a smaller 24-inch bar, and the other doesn't have a problem at all. And that's the point, is both these saws have strengths and weaknesses, and if I can get away with running the 562, why not? Because it weighs less, has less vibration. It does make good power, but it's also just, you know, it's a 60cc saw, and this is a 70cc saw with a higher compression ratio than a standard 70cc saw. And the big difference in running those two saws, obviously the weight is a difference, although the vibration is about the same, is when you first hit the throttle with that 572, it goes. Even with the bar buried, even when it's all full of sap. And with a 562, sometimes you got to work it a little bit to free up the chain, and sometimes I actually have to pull it all the way out and then knock out the chips and the sap, get it going before I can stick it back in the tree. It just doesn't have enough power to work through that sort of unique to maple scenario where you have a lot of sap coming out mixed with the chips, working into the chain, working into the bar. And this one has the power. So rather than talk about it so much, I think I'm just going to start folding in some clips of the two different saws. And that'll be talking about why the power of the 572 pays as compared to the power of the 562. Although the weight of the 562 for breaking down the tops with that light bar is easier to work with than the 572. So they both have a purpose. There it goes. So that's two concepts. Number one, the power, which one makes more power, obviously the 70cc saw does. And why is that important? I think we can demonstrate that. And the second is, while that's more powerful, it's also heavier. So when breaking out the tops and breaking down the branches, that one right there is the more useful saw to me. They both have a purpose. They both have a place where their configuration helps me, and therefore one will get the nod versus the other. And I have these two on the tractor pretty much full time now. We'll have other project saws, but right now it's about these two. So a sidebar, no pun intended, is I like the look of the Western style saws with the full wrap. I just think it looks cool. So when I went about building this saw, I wanted to have something that was fun, look cool, and I would compromise a little bit on performance in order to achieve that. And it was a, you know, eyes open recognition of that. And then of course you start working around those limitations and modifying the saw a little bit at a time until it works for you. At least that's what I do. So I guess that's part two. It's bucking spikes. Both of these saws have got the larger bucking spikes. The execution of the 562 is more useful for me as it came out of the factory. This is factory Husqvarna, and so is that. And I'm not quite sure I understand exactly why, but I've really never had a problem with that set of bucking spikes prematurely stalling the chain, no matter what I do, whether I'm bucking wood or felon or bore cutting or face cutting. But the one thing I can say is, especially on the steeper angles that I use for making the face cut, having that extra length makes it easier for me to bite into the tree, where the shorter ones oftentimes I was actually hitting with the case. So I started out with a full wrap into larger bucking spikes from the Husqvarna kit, because especially on some of the smaller trees I wanted to cut closer to the ground. I went from the full wrap like that to the standard, and not out of any design on my part, I left those bucking spikes on and just kept going, and found out that, you know something, that's actually a really, really good configuration for what I do. That 24-inch light bar, the longer bucking spikes, but with a conventional handle so I can get right down to the ground, making you know, as much as I can out of a tree. That really, really works for me. It may not work for other people, and I'm sure there's better blends, but for what I do here, general farm work, sometimes felling trees, you know, the 20-inch, the 22-inch trees, not the big ones, that damn thing works good. Now this one, on the other hand, the reason I went to a full wrap on it was because I liked the way it looked. But the thing that actually drove me to do that is because I screwed up in the muffler, and I needed to find a way to either replace the muffler, which are hard to find. 572 parts are hard to find and they're expensive. So my solution was to put those big old bucket spikes on there, kind of hold the saw away from the work. And along with the full wrap, I figured, okay, that looks cool. Why not? There's a lot of people out there that do that. It kind of reminds me of that old meme you used to see where you get 50,000 flies around a piece of shit, right? Can't be wrong. No, that's not fair. But anyway, yeah, I went to that configuration and pretty much instantly ran into the problem of, because of the geometry of the bucking spike, it would just jam that chain. It would wedge it right in and stall it on the simplest of operations on the smaller trees for sure. So I had talked about that a little bit in one of the other videos. So, you know, still wanting to use a saw, you know, the first thing that came to my mind is it's a 0 minus 0 proposition. So I went and cut the bottom of these just a little bit, took about a ½ inch off. And I'll tell you what, that works. No longer does it overpower the chain, stall the chain. It's just a very, very, very useful combination for me, that one right there, with the bucking spikes the way they are. So, kind of a learning experience for me. But isn't that what this is about? You see stuff, try stuff. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. You know, and that's part of the enjoyment of this whole hobby for me, not being a professional, is to try the different things and see what works. Now, along the way, just as shop notes, two things I've also had to do. One was, again, on that 562, this will be like once a year, I have to replace that pull start pulley because it's just simply not strong enough for that saw with the higher compression ratio that it has. If I use the decomp, it's not a problem, but oftentimes I'll get impatient. You know, I just stalled it or something like that, or I just want to get going and just grab a hold of the saw and yank on it without doing the decomp. Well, it eventually breaks that pulley. So it did that again, so I replaced that. It's pretty easy. They're cheap. So that's a side note. But I stuck with the VersaCut on that saw. It works. On this saw, on the other hand, with the 28, I've replaced the 28-inch Sujihara relabeled Husqvarna light bar with the Husqvarna X-Tough solid bar. And I didn't want to. I kind of like the look of the Sujihara, and I like the fact that it's quite a bit lighter. The balance is better for me. It was just too flexible. And I don't know whether it's because of the 28-inch or the saw or how you operate the saw because you have the full wrap. I really haven't thought about it or come up with a reason why. But it's a problem. You know, a couple of times I would get it out of the tree and I'd, you know, either come close to sticking or I want to leave the saw. The damn thing's like a wet noodle. You know, it wants to fold over with the saw, or if I pull on it, there's not enough stiffness to actually pull hard, especially if you have a little bit of a side load. And the net of that was I had one situation where I did jam it, and I'm looking at that saw as I'm walking away, and that bar's bent over, and I'm like, no, this ain't working. And when I tried to pull on it, because I didn't have a straight pull, it would bend, and I didn't really get a good pull at the end because it was just too flexible. Hard to articulate, just an experience that I had, and I got frustrated, and I went back to the solid bar and never looked back, and found that, yeah, pretty much works better for me with that saw. And I haven't quite figured out how to quantify it. All I know is I just feel a lot more comfortable. I've had less issues, especially when it comes to having to yank it out of the wood or leaving the saw in the wood, you know, things like that. Just having the extra stiffness matters. Now, so that's a lot of stuff, right? Power of the 572 versus the 562. Again, I'll demonstrate that with videos, why it matters. Why a light bar seems to work still on the 562, but I had to remove it from the 572. I'm not sure that's quite as clear. It's just something I prefer to do. The bucking spike configuration, it's another one. Pull start's another one. And of course I'll throw in there maybe a little short video of why, as much as I like the full wrap, every once in a while it can be a hindrance in the sense that it'll interfere with the root flares. Now I try to cut space. I think I just showed that in the last video. And yeah, a couple inches here, a couple inches there don't matter so much really in reality. It matters in argument, but not in fact. But that's interesting. The fact of the matter is that I like it more than I dislike it, so there it is. I've got that saw with a full wrap. I found that to be the case with the G395 as well. You know, there are just sometimes where having that extra handle on there was better for me. Whereas on the 562, I took it off and never looked back. So, moral of the story, oh man, all these things work. But everybody will take their own situation and hone the saws to fit their particular situation. Grab a few beech along the way, get out of here with a few beech. I don't know, 3 or 4. So that's one of the neat things about the winch, is I can kind of drive on by, nip and tuck, and then just grab what I want, hook onto it and pull it out. Alright, now I can play a little bit. Got most of what I needed up and out. Man, look at this dead thing right here. Wow, I don't like being underneath that. Wow, look at that split. It's going to come apart right there. I don't know why I'm standing here. I don't think I'm going to hang out here much longer because I don't believe that's going to stay up there much longer. Boy, I tell you what, you wouldn't know it until you come right up to it, the way that split is. So anyway, what I'm going to do real fast is I'm going to cut my way so I can get the tractor through. Then I'm going to hook onto that and pull it that way.